want to be respectful of everyone's time, so thank you for the board members and again, those who are joining us online. I know we have Ms. Thompson online.
Hi,
Thank you to staff for joining us this evening. Can you hear us okay, Ms. Thompson?
I sure can. Thank you.
Okay. So we want to again welcome those who are joining us online. This is the third of the four-part series for workshops for the board. Tonight, we're focused on safety, crisis response, multi-tier systems of support, and the additional work that we're doing around social, emotional, behavioral needs, touching on school climate. Again, as we are aligned with our strategic plan. And again, this is just an opportunity for the board to be able to get some firsthand information and engage with staff, clarify any questions that is not the fire alarm, that is the doorbell.
Always bad timing.
Yeah, great. So we have staff from our student services department as well as Office of Public Safety here to present this evening, and then we'll engage from there. So I will turn it over to Dr. Celestin, and we can just do some general introductions to all the board members of staff who you may not, you may know them by name, but may not necessarily put a name with a face. I think we have some dynamic presenters here tonight. Again, I think as a district, we're fortunate to have the knowledge and skill set helping lead the initiatives that our schools are benefiting from. So at this point, I turn it over to Dr. Celestin.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Celestin, and I am privileged to lead our student services and our special education groups. So I'm the senior director that oversees those areas. And we have two of my colleagues are here with us this evening, along with AJ, who is my co-chair for the district leadership team on safety. So if you guys want to.
Hi, I'm Kenny Oates. I'm the supervisor of student services.
Hi, I'm Heather Godwin. I am an ed associate in student services, so I support with our counselors and social workers and MTSS related things.
And then AJ, I think all of you know, AJ is a supervisor for public safety. So just to kind of orient you for what we're going to cover tonight, as Dr. Green said, we've got several topics that are all related to school safety, crisis response, and then social emotional supports. So the way we've kind of divided it up is the first half of the presentation is based on our district leadership team that oversees safety and crisis response. So AJ and I co-chair that, and we're going to talk about some updates on that team and what that team has been working on related to both physical safety and then also psychological safety. So that's kind of the first half. And then the second half of the presentation is focused on the system of support where we provide social, emotional, and behavioral interventions and services. And Heather and Kenny are going to give updates on what that looks like, including our social emotional screener that we use to look at needs of students. So I think, Maria, are you good? Do you want me to advance the slides? Oh, you're good. Okay. So this is just kind of an orientation agenda wise. If we go to the next slide, it talks a little bit, Maria, if you can dump over to the next one. There we go. Okay. So the district leadership team I mentioned that AJ and I coordinate is a team that meets at least quarterly. Some years we've met more often depending on the needs of the district. This year our meeting cycle was quarterly. And the idea of this team is really to look at the safety needs of the district and also what areas we need to respond to in terms of crisis support. So I won't read everything. You can kind of see the team purpose here and our goal. And so we work together on both physical safety things, and AJ is going to give an update about that, but that includes everything from drills, reunification plan, making sure that our schools are equipped and knowing how to respond to physical safety events. And then it also includes several things that are related to psychological safety, including emergency response if there's a death, responding to students that might be very escalated in a personal crisis, as well as things like grief counseling and support for our community. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The next slide just highlights some of the things that this district leadership team has accomplished in the last few years. So I won't read through all of them. I'm going to actually hit on a couple of these points, and I know AJ, I think, is also hitting on a few of them. But this just gives you an idea of each year, this team really sets out goals for the year, and each year we typically have 2 to 3 working committees, subcommittees that actually work on all sorts of things, everything from expanding tabletop activities for emergency response to planning for kind of district-wide crisis response. So these are just a kind of a variety of things we've done in the last 2 to 3 years. Last year specifically, we really worked on expanding tabletop exercises, which we'll talk about in just a bit, as well as developing a website for community members to understand how we respond in crisis events. So this is just kind of a little synopsis of the things we've been working on. But I'm going to turn it over to AJ, who's going to walk us through some of the updates on physical safety.
Sarah, will these
Sure.
be sent out to the board?
Yes, yeah, and I apologize that you didn't get it earlier. Maria has the slide deck. She's going to post it on Board Docs.
great.
And there's also,
It's on
Yeah.
board.
oh, it's on Board Docs. Oh, thanks,
It
Maria.
is?
And there's
Should have been,
also,
she put it on.
there's also some live links in here that I'll point out when we get to them, because there's some live links that take you to the guidelines that are more specific. So.
Good evening, everyone. Now, I talked about school safety individually with a lot of you, but it's good to see everyone as a group. So thanks for having me. I want to get right into school, physical safety, right? Currently, our SO1 constable coverage in Red Clay schools, we have 5 SROs. Our SROs are active Delaware State Police that are contracted through our district, and they come to our schools. We also have 7 constables. Out of them 7 constables, 6 are retired Delaware State Police, and 1 is a retired Newcastle County officer. And then I'm also considered a constable, but I work mainly in district office, but I also spend time in schools. That's just it. Required drills, everything that we do in Red Clay for school safety is we follow the comprehensive school safety program, which falls under Delaware Emergency Management, which is in Smyrna, which falls under Delaware Homeland Security. So we're mandated to do fire drills every month, so we do 9 per year. We do 2 lockdown intruder drills. And we complete 1 tabletop drill, which comes out of my office. I pick the tabletop drill, kind of a current event, tabletop drill and the safety teams at every school go through the tabletop drill. And then we also require that the school safety teams at every school meet 3 times a year. Okay. They can meet, talk about anything that's current in their school that will be beneficial for their safety team.
And AJ, they're required to meet 3 times, but if they choose to meet more, they have the ability.
And
to
they,
meet
a lot of
more.
them need more.
So,
But when
so
they
every
meet,
school has a safety team. is that
That's
correct?
Yes.
when we talk to staff, tell them when we do our drills, it's serious to take drills. Serious and to have a scripted plan. It's, we don't practice them and we're not gonna be prepared if something happens. Next. Gaggle, about, let's say 7 or 8 years ago, partnered with Gaggle Online Safety Management. It was a really big purchase, great purchase for the district. Gaggle reviews student browser activities on school provided accounts or devices. They offer an additional practice student safety measure that works 24/7. Gaggle flags concerning student searches and generates alerts for emergency contacts. It actively monitors and captures concerning content entered into browsers, including forms, chats, emails, drafts, and even unsent comments. When I say 24/7, it is 24/7. How it works, if Gaggle sees something, an alert, that's serious, they will send out a text, and then they give a call to Mark Pruitt, myself, Aaron DeCastro, or the school administration, right? So if it's say a student is searching suicide hotline, right, that would raise a red flag. Whether it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, we get calls, we would then contact that parent at home. They would make sure that their child is okay. It's a tool that has really worked. All right, standard response protocol. So everything that we do up and down the state, what I'm going to show you is comes through DEMA, right? So what we tell our staff, in any emergency, got to take action, whether you're an administrator, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a student. If you see something that's not right, notify, right? So like I said, this is up and down the state. This is all communication skills that we know. So an emergency, take an action. Hold. People say, what is a hold? So we have an event, a medical event in our hallways where a chief custodian may be having a medical emergency. He's down on the ground, nurses working on him, we're waiting for an ambulance to arrive. We don't want students to see that. So the principal will announce, at this time, we're going to go into a hold pattern. All it means is students stay in their classrooms. We don't change classes till that emergency is clear. Right? We also have it, if we have a fight of 3 or 4 students in a middle school or high school, we'll also call a hold to keep kids away from them, from the ruckus. Right? Secure basically is, if kids are out on the playground playing, or we're outside doing some kind of a field day, and there's something going on in the community, we may get alerted by police, or maybe a dog on the loose. They have a suspicious person walking through a parking lot. We'll call it secure. We'll get our students in right away. Several years ago, we had 2 incidents on the same day at Shortledge and then at Warner. The police, after the event, contacted me and were impressed at the staff at how fast they got the students in the school out of danger. It was a active vehicle pursuit and then a foot pursuit that went through the playground at Shortledge, and the teachers acted immediately. Lockdown is the most serious. That is basically when there is an immediate threat inside one of our buildings or on the outside. And I'm going to talk more about lockdown, how we teach it in Red Clay. We followed the FBI model of run, hide, fight. Evacuate is quite simple. If we're inside, there's a fire or a gas odor, we just evacuate the building. And as you can see, I'm not going to read it, but everything says what a student needs to do and what the adult needs to do. And then shelter in place is all weather related incidents. And this is something, I'm proud to say that Red Clay is the only district in Newcastle County that every September or August, we do every staff, we go to every school, my team, and we talk to staff before school starts. And we give a 45-minute presentation. A lot of stuff that you'll see today is what we talk to our staff about. We really try to hammer these to staff. Any questions so far? Yes,
I
next
do.
slide.
This is Kesia Neesmith, and I might have missed the beginning of it. I didn't see, I guess you don't use the Alice protocol. I didn't see anything about countering. Is that part of your protocol?
We don't use Alice in Red Clay. We use run, hide, fight, which it's basically the same, but we've been teaching run, hide, fight for 8 years, and our staff is familiar with it. So we're going to stick with run, hide, fight.
Okay, I just have a little bit of concern about the hide part, having done those tabletop drills and what happens if you are hiding and someone finds you. So I guess that's just something we can think about, but not
So-
really sure. Just when I talk to my son about it and what to do, hiding a lot of times makes you a sitting duck. So I just was curious to know what your thoughts were around using that protocol versus the Alice.
Okay, that's a great question. So what we teach primarily in our K through 3 is to hide or deny access to where you are. In our 4th through 12th grade, we try to teach them to run first to get out of danger. But a lot of times, if you don't know the whereabouts of the attacker, it's senseless to run away because you may run into danger. So a lot of times it's best to run and deny in the area that you're in, whether it be a classroom, it could be a custodial closet. It could be anywhere that you can get out of harm's way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I certainly would think that for the younger ones, just, with the informed piece, and how staff members can communicate, is there a way for them to communicate, given a situation? Do you have any, applications or any of those things?
So, Casey, I'm just gonna read, this is Sarah, I'm just gonna repeat, AJ, so she's asking about how does the staff communicate when these things are going on?
So, Keith, if you don't mind, I'm going to touch on run, hide, fight on the next slide, and I can go over all that.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the event of an active threat situation, such as an active shooter type attack, all staff are empowered to take action to protect themselves and their students, right? So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but in every classroom, we have telephones. You can hit *10 and you make an all call through all of our buildings. It goes into hallways, you got speaker systems, we got speakers in our classrooms, so we can make an alert. So the fastest way to make an alert, if a teacher's looking out the window and she sees a white male that's suspicious and looks like he has a rifle, she is empowered to pick up that phone, hit *10 and do an all call through the whole building. But we have many other ways, Keisha, how we can alert our staff, because mass communication in any emergency is so vital. The sooner that we alert everybody, the safer people will be. Next. Okay, run, hide, fight. So run, basically run means avoid. You're avoiding the perpetrator, you're getting out of danger. Middle school and high schools, they know how to react if they hear gunshots. They may be in an area where they can get outside and leave. Our little kids, K through 3, they don't understand. They don't have a sense of urgency. So they kind of hesitate. That's why we don't want our K through 3, even 4 running. I seen kids at a dismissal and arrival, little kids, 5-year-olds, they get out, they mope. At the end of the day, they're moping to the bus. So for a teacher to get 20, 25 little kids out safely is almost impossible. So that's why we don't use run. But run basically is we get away from the shooter, which is most people's instincts. Another way to remember this is to avoid, okay? If we're here right now and we hear shooting, we're gonna go out that door, right? We're in the hallway, we may have to jump into a classroom and lock down if there's not an exit. Next slide. Hide, which is deny. If it's not possible to get away from an active shooter safely, the next option is to hide. Another way to think of hiding is to consider the word deny. Trying to deny the active shooter entry into your space, right? When we do our drills, I go to probably 20 intruder drills a year, probably more. As soon as we go into hide, we shut our locked classroom doors. In Red Clay, it's about the 7th year, our classroom doors protocol is that they are locked at all times. They can be open, but they need to be locked. If anybody researches school shootings as much as I do, you'll know that up in Connecticut, Sandy Hook, it's an elementary school shooting. 2 of the teachers that were killed in 2 classrooms, and most of the kids were killed. Teachers were going to their pocketbooks or their jackets to get their key. They were killed en route back to locker door. So put that up. It's like 18 to 20 students, if I recall. So after that shooting, I talked to the superintendent. We thought it was best that our classroom doors remain locked at all times, but they can be open. We turn off our lights immediately. We cover classroom door windows. We blockade the door with heavy furniture if time allows. It's not that important. Best thing is ways to get out of danger. We turn off our whiteboards. We don't want anyone to have any indication that someone's in there. Out of the active shooter's view, silence your cell phone. That's so important for middle school and high schoolers. Teachers know that. Remain calm and quiet. Several of the shootings throughout our country, because of the vibration.
We gotta
of
get
rifle,
that switch from the fire alarm.
It's just the doorbell, but it sounds like a fire alarm.
So what we teach our staff is a lot of shootings, because of the vibration of the rifle, the loudness, it'll cause the fire alarm to activate. During a school shooting, when we call, hey, there's a perpetrator in our building, he's a white male, he's dressed in all black, he's by the library and has a rifle. That means we lock down. If we have to lock down, if we run, we run. But if we lock down and the fire alarm goes off, we do not exit our classrooms. And we stay in there, because more likely, that's the, if there's a fire, someone will be able to make a police respond, or get the students out after the.
And I want to just say too, and I think with what each one of these unfortunate situations, these things evolve. The tactics and response changes. I want to say it was Arkansas while ago, where actually 2 students realized that if they pulled the fire alarm, everyone's going to evacuate, and they were actually perched on a elevated area to be able to actually pick people off. So that idea of, again, being mindful that if the alarm goes off, unless you get an all clear and you're hiding, you stay put.
So that's a great point. So in Red Clay, what we started before we do a fire alarm or an intruder drill, the principal gets on the loudspeaker and announces we're about to do a drill. So we tell our staff, if a fire alarm goes off during the day, we don't act like robots, get up from a seat and exit. They need to get in the hallway, look, check their surroundings, make sure it's safe, listen, then we respond out if it's not a planned drill. Next. Fight, that means defend yourself. It's human nature. If somebody's come hurt, we don't teach anyone to fight in red clay. It's totally up to that person to protect themselves. But we don't get into fighting. Next.
I always had a big boulder since I was Earth Science teacher by the door. Somebody came in, they're gonna get a boulder.
You can
mass
put that in the budget, we'll
Yeah.
get everyone bold.
As a Delaware State Trooper for 28 years, we had a lot of equipment on our belt. Most important thing I had was my radio. If I needed help, I called for help, the cavalry's coming. Mass communication, what we have in red clay, we've done a really good job. Classrooms, I said we could dial star 10 in any classroom. We have walkie-talkies. We just finished 2 or 3 years ago purchasing the same camera for all of our schools. Now we're into purchasing walkie-talkies for the schools. It comes out of my budget. So I can keep an eye on it, what we're spending. Intercom system and then Rave Panic Button. Rave Panic Button is something that the county purchased several years ago. It's an app that 1,700 out of approximately 3,000 staff in our district have downloaded the app. I input their phone number and information, and we have it mainly for an active shooter. So how it works, I hold this button down for 1.5 seconds, goes around. Everyone that has the app on their phone will get an alert, even before 911 is contacted. Then something pops up at the bottom, it says dial 911. You hit that, then it gets the police alerted, but it alerts us immediately. Next. Let's go over our safety and security procedures. Like I said, all classroom doors locked at all times. An exterior door should never be propped in our district, with the exception of arrival and dismissal. But when a door is propped at arrival and dismissal, there has to be a staff member right at that door in case there's a threat that it can shut it in a timely manner. I tell the staff all the time, it's great that your classroom door is locked, but you need to shake it, make sure that it's latching properly. One of the problems that we have, I would say the biggest problem in the morning is some of our secretaries get a little lazy. They don't want to be buzzing people in constantly. So they allow vestibule doors to be open. We don't want that. Angry parent comes in, follows the teacher, and they can get into the school. We don't want anyone to have access into our schools unless they're buzzed in. We utilize only 2 entrances for arrival, with the exception of Cab Callaway and Charter. We have 3, and AI Middle, we have 3. Other than that, all of their schools use 2 entrances, so we can monitor who's coming in and out of our schools in the morning. Visitors always enter through the main entrance. They have an orange lanyard with visitor patch attached. We tell our staff, if you observe anyone inside our school that you do not know, they do not have a visitor pass, you either contact the administrator or approach them and ask what they're doing in our school. Staff, it's important to be vigilant at all times. And please report any suspicious vehicles or persons to your administrator. Anytime a class goes outside, it's mandated that they take a walkie-talkie with them in case something happens on the exterior. We have a family unification plan that Sarah is helping with over the years. Her department is a big part of this puzzle. We have 100 employees assigned to the plan. It's used when it's necessary to release students directly to their parent or designate emergency contact due to an emergency situation that prevents a normal dismissal. So if we have an explosion inside of one of our schools, or a fire, or some kind of violent incident, police come, they deem it a crime scene. We can't do a normal dismissal. That's when the off-campus family unification plan goes into effect. Like I said, that's some of the things that we'll do. Next. This past year, we talked to staff about their responsibilities during a lockdown and where we had to use the off-campus reunification plan. It is a plan that I have spent hundreds of hours on that I hope we never have to use. When a lockdown is called, teachers, staff, and students may be locked in a classroom, office, or any part of the building for hours until police respond and deem that it's safe to remove students from the school. Remain quiet and calm. An administrator or police officer will make an all call. We do not answer the door for anybody when they knock, unless we know it's an administrator or police, and more than likely the police will have a key and they will go door to door. clear it to make sure it's safe. Staff will then escort students to buses. They provide a list of evacuated students reunification plan at the upon arrival. We have snacks. We have Mandy Pennington, Director of Nursing, Director of Transportation, Kelly Shahan, plays a vital part in this plan. Something that, like I said, we hope we never have to use. Next. So I'm almost finished. I know I'm long-winded here. Last couple of years, I've worked with the Delaware State Police SWAT team. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, we started putting signs over top our classroom doors. So first responders needed, when they respond, they can immediately look at where they need to go. I did a intruder training down at Polytech High School. And when we did the training, we were running down the hallways and we had to basically stop at every door to see it because it's on the wall. Okay. That's why the state police said it's good for first responders to put it there. So we've done that. Next slide, please. We also mark our doors. Interior, that's an interior door that leads to an exit. Front of the building is always 1, side is 2, back is 3, other side is 4. First responders know it, and they know exactly how to react. And that's the exterior that shows you how it's marked. That was the second part, and all of our buildings are marked like that now.
So an interesting fact on yesterday, I'm at one of my mentoring sessions and my mentee, as we're walking out, he's like, what does that 4G stand for on that door? So he actually noticed it was 2 things that happened in that moment, but he actually wanted to know what it was. And I explained to him, it's just a matter of like, so if you see 2A on the door behind us, right, really labeling that in the event that there was an emergency and they needed to access something outside of the building, we can let them know where a point of entry would be for a particular emergency.
We're trying to get our administrators to react that we need an ambulance, try to get it to the closest door. So if something happened here, we would say, can you please respond to 2A? They say it on the outside, first responders, we know that where we're at. That's why it's on the inside and inside. Next. That's all. Any questions?
Question, are the SROs for the elementary school level, when are they,
I'm sorry.
for the elementary school?
We have constables.
Oh, okay, oh,
We have
good.
constables. We just hired 2 more constables that started in January. We have, if anyone saw the Facebook post that Alva put out, we have a
Therapy dog.
therapy dog. Came from the state police. He was a bomb dog, but he transitioned to a therapy dog. He's been a big hit.
Mhm.
He's more popular than me.
He's very popular. And he's been at the elementaries, but he's also been at preschool too. And I think they wanted to keep him there at preschool.
They're the dog's there every Monday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it a German Shepherd?
No.
It's a red
They're great
fox.
dogs, I mean, they.
Yeah, we didn't want any dog that was threatening or anything, so it's a red fox.
It's almost like a retriever.
Retriever, it's a red fox.
It's a retriever.
Uh-huh.
And,
They're very mild.
I'm trying to think of dog's name. Oh, goodness gracious. Because I was actually, Harper, yes. So I was actually at EYP. I stopped by EYP yesterday and Harper showed up at the same time.
Yes.
And
Harper's
Very
very
excited.
popular.
the preschool students are so excited and ecstatic when Harper's there. So Harper by demand is at our EYP program on Monday.
But board members, if you have any questions, feel free to email
Just one.
me. Yes.
It says left and right, for your numbering, is that from looking front to back? So,
So when you come to the front of the building, and you're staring at it, that's always
Okay.
1A would be the furthest door to the right, that works right
so
to
it's in the
left.
front of it.
Yeah, so the left of the
One
building is
Could
2.
be the opposite.
Yeah.
So this is the left
Yeah.
side, that's
Gotcha.
2. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, AJ. So I know AJ had mentioned some teams, like our safety team, so I'm gonna talk about a few other teams that our buildings have, and then we have a visual to kind of talk about the team. So, 2 different teams. We have our district deployment team for crisis events. So this is different than our overall leadership team. Our deployment teams are made up of school-based mental health professionals, so social workers, counselors, psychologists. And they deploy out in the event that we have something that has affected the entire school community that's beyond what that school community the internal staff can handle. So I did link our resource document that kind of goes over our procedures. But basically, there are some things that are automatic deployments. So like if a staff person were to pass away or a student dies, those are automatic deployments to be able to provide support to our students and also to the faculty there. But sometimes it's other events. So let's say there was a community-based shooting or something that happened that was affecting a lot of the students or staff in that building. Our deployment teams can support with that too. And they basically provide support, everything from grief counseling to being able to work with student and family and connect them with outside resources if they need ongoing support. The one thing that's important to know about the deployment teams is they are staff that are being pulled from other buildings. So we have 4 teams, they rotate. And so what happens is if there's an event, our department coordinates those teams. So we will put a team on standby, or we'll activate a team and then they will go out. Typically it's short term. Usually they're not there longer than a week's time. We have had a couple larger scale events where they were at supporting a building for 2 weeks. And at that point we had to rotate deployment teams because obviously they're coming from other buildings. And so we don't want to pull them every day from the buildings they're supporting. But this has been really an effective way for us to provide support. In the event of a long-term need, so for example, a few years ago, we had a student death. The deployment team had been there for 2 weeks and there was still a lot of needs in the school. Then we work with outside grief counseling providers. Christiana Care partners with us, Nemours, as well as some private providers. So in the event that there's ongoing support, our department coordinates those services. So that's one type of team that we have.
Excuse me.
Oh, sure, Martin. Yeah,
So, case in point, last night.
last night. Yes.
So did we wind up start that?
No,
So I can-
we
yeah.
need to see what.
So typically what happens, you see what the nature of the response, because not all things are equal. And so we work with the building administrator, you
Yeah.
work with the building level school counselors to ultimately determine what's the level of response. But Dr. Sellison and her team are always
Yeah.
on standby in events. So let's say that they decided they needed that extra support for that deployment team, because sometimes the staff in the building are close to it as well
Yeah.
and aren't able to provide the care. So they themselves need support.
Yeah.
And that's why that external crisis team may come in a lot of times. So in this particular case, as of now, it didn't warrant any kind of activation of a response.
Yeah. But what-
Dr. Worcester could have called.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
so I spoke with Dr. Royster. Mr. Pruitt was also involved because whoever is the supervisor, there's 4 of us that supervise building administrators. And so whoever is the supervisor of that building administration, we're involved in that. So Mr. Pruitt and I spoke, Dr. Royster and I spoke. AJ was also involved since it involved a community-based event. So we were all in touch. Ultimately, what was decided, anytime there is a student tragedy, it's very important that we're in collaboration with the family. So we don't want to respond and put out any statements or anything until we've connected with them. So there's a process for that. Our team also does the development of the letters and the response to go out. So I work with Dr. Royster on the communications. And ultimately what was decided today is that we'll provide a deployment team on Thursday. So there was a communication that went out today, and then we coordinated a team that will be there Thursday morning to provide support for students and staff. So that's kind of how that works. But each is a little unique because it depends on how much is needed. Sometimes if it's a large situation, sometimes we will send 2 teams. In this, it's a smaller response. So we're having a team, but it's not as big of, big as a group. And so, and then if there are, like I said, individuals that need ongoing support, then we would work with those families on getting them ongoing support. So we don't just go for a couple days and leave. We really try to make sure that anybody that needs ongoing support has that in place. Yeah. Yeah. Great questions. And so, if anybody has more questions about deployment team, I'm happy to talk about that. We've had all different kinds of deployments for various reasons. And then sometimes I will say across the districts in the county, those of us that oversee deployment teams for each district, we also are in communication. So sometimes we've had situations where it's affected multiple districts and we'll coordinate our teams. Or if there's a bigger event that starts in one district that there's a concern about branching out into another district, we coordinate that with all of us that oversee deployment teams in the county. So that's something that we do kind of behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't aware of. Then we have our student crisis readiness teams. Now, these are school-based teams. So AJ mentioned the safety team. The safety team is the team that looks at drills, tabletop activities, those kinds of things. The student crisis readiness team is a school-based team of staff. It usually involves a lot of our specialists, like our counselors, psychologists, nurses, things like that. But it also can involve teachers and administrators. This is a specialty team that is trained on the Devereaux safe and positive approaches to responding to students that are escalated. So these are, let's say a student is personally in crisis, they're escalated, maybe they're becoming self-injurious, they need assistance. This team is trained on de-escalation strategies to try to bring that student down and to help them to get back to a regulated state. In the event that the student becomes a harm to themselves or to others, where maybe they are hurting themselves or they're trying to hurt someone else, then we would potentially move to personal emergency interventions, which are, it's a particular protocol for restraining a student. Obviously, we don't do that. That's not the first step. We wouldn't do that unless it was such a safety risk that we were afraid that the student was going to harm themselves or harm someone else. So there are very specific guidelines for the student crisis readiness teams. They have annual training and recertifications that they have to go through. And then we also have a team of trainers in the district that goes through annual train the trainer certification every spring in order for us to do all the trainings required. So I did include the guidelines for that. I will say we also there's a board policy related to personal emergency interventions. And in that board policy, there's a required district level committee in the event that we see that a student is having a pattern of restraints where they're not able to de-escalate. We actually have a district level committee that reviews those student cases and provides support on what the next steps would be to support that child. Because that's very serious if a student is escalated to that point where they need a personal emergency intervention. So I linked, when you get the slides, you'll see there's a live link in there so you can see the full guidelines if you have an interest in that. So Maria, we can go to the next slide. So this is really, this slide and the next slide kind of show the district level and school-based teams just to kind of give you a visual, because some of these teams work together and overlap. So at the district level, on the left side, we have our leadership team for safety and crisis response. That's the team that AJ and I oversee. And we look at overall policies, procedures, and recommendations for the district. On the right-hand side, we have the team that AJ mentioned, the Family Reunification Plan team, which is made up of pretty much every department in the district. We all have an active role in that team. And then below that is our district deployment teams, which are the teams that I mentioned that respond to emergency events or crisis events at a school to provide psychological support, grief counseling, and so on. So I just included this so you can see the visual of all the district level teams. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the school-based teams. So on the left-hand side is the school safety team that AJ mentioned. They're the ones that are looking at drills, they're looking at emergency responses, and then on the overall, like school-wide. And then on the right-hand side are our student crisis readiness team members that are trained in de-escalation techniques and personal emergency interventions. You can see that in the center, there is some overlap between those two teams. There are a lot of similar members on those two teams, but the two teams have very distinctive roles. So I just wanted to put this up so you could kind of see a visual of kind of what the differences are and where the overlap is between those two teams. Really, ultimately, both of the teams are working on safety, just in a little bit of a different way. The left side is working on kind of drills and overall safety response, whereas the right side is safety for individual students that might be escalated and in a crisis. Okay, so we can go to the next one. All right, so the other pieces that we look at in the district leadership team related to psychological safety, we look at risk assessments. So these are the assessments that our school-based mental health professionals do related to threat assessment or suicidal ideation. So let's say we have an individual student who is making threatening statements. Maybe they're saying they're going to hurt someone. Maybe they're saying we've had students that have made threats against the school as a whole. So this would be something like, I'm going to set a fire. I'm going to bring in a weapon, or maybe they're threatening an individual student, like I'm going to hurt this student, I'm going to follow them home and do something. Those would be threat assessments, right? And so our psychologists, our counselors, our nurses are even trained on this as well. And threat assessments also involve our building level administrators, right? So typically when we do a threat assessment, a school-based mental health professional in conjunction with administrator are involved. And then depending on the level of threat that's assessed, our SROs or constables may also be involved if it's a high-risk situation.
And Sarah,
Yeah.
just so one of the things, and it's not customary, so all things aren't equal across districts. So one of the examples, we actually had a convening earlier today around some mental health toolkit supports. And we had nurses from Newcastle County School Districts. We're actually one of 2 Newcastle County School Districts where our nurses are actually trained on doing the risk assessment.
Yes.
Again, they're not the initial first responder, but it's really cross-training and looking at collective care in terms of how we actually look at supporting that, because a child could be in a nurse's office, you know, for anxiety or, you know, manifesting itself,
Yeah.
but it could be something more around psychological safety, but it's presenting itself as my stomach hurts or different things. So really cross-training and making sure our nurses and psychologists, school counselors, other support staff have that cross-training is important.
Yes, and we do that training with them every year. We've actually started to do 2 levels of training. So there's a basic level of training on the procedures, and then there's a more comprehensive training on how to conduct the assessment, the types of questions you ask, how to be able to get information from the students about what they're thinking. So a lot of our psychologists lead those trainings because they've had advanced training in that, but we make sure that we have multiple people, as Dr. Green said, because we don't want one person to be tied up and then there's nobody available. The other type of risk assessment is an assessment related to suicidal ideation. So if a student is making statements of self-harm or they're making statements that I'm going to go home and harm myself, typically, again, usually the psychologists and counselors would be the first responders, but we also have the nurses cross-trained in order to be able to look at that. So I've included our risk assessment guidelines. And then I want to make sure we have time for all the other items. I did include every May, our district leadership team reviews the data from the year. So I did include the risk assessment data from last school year. It goes up until the beginning of May because we meet in the middle of May. So we look at the start of the year all the way through beginning of May. So that data slide deck is linked here just so that you can see. I think one of the things that may surprise you in that data is a lot of times when people think about the risk assessments, they think about older students, they think about high school. But one of the trends that we've seen the last few years is that the age group, the demographic of where we're seeing the most risk assessments has actually been sliding down. So just 2 years ago, it was middle school. And when you look at last year's data, we see a high number in elementary. So that's something I just wanted to point out because it has been, the demographic of risk assessments has been sliding to lower ages. The other piece that we look at, and our department coordinates this, is outside agency collaboration. So these are students that might be going into an acute hospitalization due to psychiatric or mental health needs. This would be providers such as Rockford, Meadowood Behavioral Health. We even have some students that go downstate to Sun Behavioral Health or Dover Behavioral Health. And we also sometimes have students that go out of state to, in Pennsylvania, there's a place called Kids Peace, which a lot of insurance providers recommend. So we work directly with all of those providers. One of our district coordinators meets with them regularly so that we can really work on being able to bring the students back in and support them to transition back into their school and to be able to have the support needed in order to have a successful transition back. So there is a guide here. We have our procedures that we use, but we also last year put out a guide for teachers to understand what it's like to receive a student back into your room who's been in a hospitalization situation. And then I also included the data, again, of the trends that we saw last year for students and outside agency. There are some specific trends typically related to months. So we definitely see, sadly around the holiday time, around coming back to school in January, that's a time that we see an uptick in hospitalizations, but there's definitely certain patterns that we see year to year. So this is something that the district leadership team looks at every year, at least in the spring. This year, we actually looked at it earlier in the year. And then we also we'll look at it again in May in order to make recommendations about what the needs are. The data that I provided to you is the district level data by month. So you can kind of see trends. But I will say that the district leadership team, we also sometimes will drill down into school level data if we're starting to see patterns and we think that a school may need more assistance. So that's something that we look at. We also use it, Heather and I use it also for planning for staffing around counselors, social workers, and then I oversee psychologists. So we look at that data when we're trying to plan for our staffing needs as well. So I don't know if anyone has kind of questions on the psychological safety pieces.
Sarah, I have one on the last slide. I
Sure.
think I have my hand up, but I don't think you can see it.
It's okay.
It's about the de-escalation strategies. I heard you say that there's teams trained in, I know that they have the safety, restraint type training, but just the speaking specifically about the de-escalation training, are all teachers and staff trained in de-escalation or just that group of administrators or district
So
trained
that,
people?
yeah, Keisha, that's a great question. So there's kind of two parts to the question. So for Devereaux Safe and Positive Approaches, that's a full day training on de-escalation. That's the training that the student crisis response team members go to. They have a full day on that and also a full day on the personal emergency interventions. However, we do have shorter trainings that our department provides. We've provided them at district-wide faculty meetings. We've also provided them to specific groups. So Mr. Oates every year does de-escalation strategies, like a half-day training for paraprofessionals. But we also have gone to faculty meetings and done verbal de-escalation strategies. So we really try to make sure that all staff have the de-escalation support they need, but not all staff go to the full day training.
Thank
So-
you. Yeah, because I know it's hard with all time is precious when we have PD days and faculty meetings. And I know it's hard to keep up with all the things we want our staff to be trained in. But one of the things that I think came up for me with this topic is when we have schools specifically some of don't necessarily have a high population of students with needs who aren't used to having to deal with de-escalation and just making sure that we are training them every year because you can forget some things. And I think that would prevent some of because I think a lot of times adults, and you know this, adults sometimes trigger children because they don't know how not to say things. So I just wanted to bring that up and highlight that because we did have last year, a lot of commentary about certain schools and what they were doing and not doing to support. But I do think it's important for our staff to really have those skills to ensure that they know how to handle and deal with all students.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the de-escalation strategies are important, especially verbal de-escalation strategies, because if you can de-escalate there, then you prevent a lot of things that could creep up and become bigger events. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Sarah,
Yeah.
just my experience,
Mhm.
I've broken up a lot of fights. I was never trained on how to break up a fight.
Mhm.
Hopefully we're doing that now.
Mhm.
I just jumped in and tried to separate,
Separate.
mostly female.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we need that kind of training
Mhm.
to teachers because it happens all the time in the hallway. Instead of just watching it, of course, the crowd comes around with the phones. But that's something we should be training on, I believe, to all teachers.
Yes, yeah, so I just want to make sure that there is definitely a difference between, so there's de-escalation, there's, kind of what you're talking about in terms of how do you support kind of breaking up a fight. That is different than personal emergency interventions. So personal emergency interventions are specific techniques on how to restrain a student. And they are, it's different than like a blocking technique or something that would be de-escalation. So typically, for staff outside of student crisis readiness teams, we focus on de-escalation. We also have done blocking training for staff, but we wouldn't do like the personal emergency interventions where we're actually restraining staff or restraining students. That really is that student crisis readiness team that has the much broader training in that. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
just so you know, at the end of the year, last year, I put out a survey to all staff in the district about what are some of the needs for training that they had this year.
Yes.
And a part of that was, responding to challenging behaviors, how to de-escalate. So we catered our MTSS faculty meetings this year with that in mind, making sure that we can meet them where their needs were.
Yeah, and I don't think we should have staff breaking up fights. That could be a really big legal situation.
Mhm.
Okay, well, there's no one else around when you let them go and anyhow.
No, I
Yep.
get it, Vic, but I just think that it's important to understand too the
Well, I
legal
just-
ramifications.
I jumped in
I get
trying to
it.
help.
Yes, yeah.
But I did have one other thing.
Sure.
One of my experiences was a young man had a 504 IEP, roaming the hallways during lunch, yelling in the doorways. One of the teachers actually came out and followed him. Yes, they get back to class, get back to class. And I thought, it looked like trouble, so I followed just to make sure I'd be a witness, whatever
Mhm.
happened. Went around the corner and this young man, they got at it. The young man pulled out a pen ready to stab the teacher. So So again, I put him in full Nelson and preventing from
Yeah, that's
having a teacher.
right.
So
right.
part of that too is understanding students who have behavior support plans.
Right.
And in that instance, making sure that staff are aware. And I'll just use an example, and this is a non-Red Clay example prior where a custodian actually triggered a student because the custodian made the comment, why do I always see you in the hallway?
Yeah.
And that set the student off. So in that instance, that custodial staff should have been made aware of when you see this student in the hallway, don't engage,
Right.
right? Because there are staff members who are in that building. I know a lot of times the adults want to intervene
Want to help.
or want to
Right.
help.
Sure.
And in the interest of helping, not really knowing. So that becomes where problem-solving team, schools in the buildings for students who have
I think that's what.
The behavior support
really
plan.
being able to know who has behavior support plans,
Yep.
who and when to respond, because they may have staff members that I'm trying to think of, school in particular is HB. In this particular case, we have one of the staff members who is like the go-to for this particular, like the student responds to certain staff members, right? I might be adverse to females, or I might be adverse to a male. So really being understanding, having full staff to understand what could be those potential triggers to set that student off and who and how should be responded. So in that instance, so that example would be to call for assistance
Right.
Mhm.
rather than intervene in that situation because you could be triggering and be antecedent to a student. behavior.
Exactly.
And there are times we can do really simple things, like at one school, we had a situation where people wanted to engage because by nature we want to help. And we made little stop signs and we put it on the back of like a clipboard. So if I was a teacher with this kid in the hallway, I might just show you that so you know not to engage.
Mhm.
So it's quiet, the student doesn't know I'm doing it, but it's a simple little visual for the rest of the adults to like stand down.
Yes, yeah. And that's true. I think part of it is the communication, like Dr. Green said, are people aware of who has a behavior support plan, who needs what, and who to call in the event that you see the student in the hallway?
And the nonverbal cues are critical
Yes.
because that power struggle at that point,
Yeah.
we're gonna lose that battle every time we get into a
Yeah.
power struggle with students.
So when you look at children transitioning
Mhm.
to the next level, whether it's middle school or high school, as you said, the
504.
plan, I know that follows them.
Yes.
So the beginning of the year, say the staff, psychologists for that school
Mhm.
has to update the paras and everybody.
Staff, yeah, so based,
informed. I'm
yes.
just asking how.
So, yeah, so typically the way it works for students with IEPs, and when they're going from elementary to middle to high, there would be a transition meeting in the spring. So there would be representatives from the school that's receiving those students who would go to their spring transition meeting. They would go over their IEP, their behavior support plan, any of the things they have. And then as that student moves in, the folks that attended that meeting in the spring would be providing support and training those that are receiving that student. Certainly, especially at middle school and high school, there's a lot of staff involved. So it's important that whether it's a special ed coordinator, the psychologist, the counselor, that they are training all the staff that are involved with that student. Because there could be many teachers, paraprofessionals, a lot of different folks. For 504, they don't typically have those same kind of transition meetings, but what happens is at the beginning of the year, the 504 coordinators have the list of all the incoming kids that have a 504. So they typically review that and then send it out to the staff that are involved. There are some students that have a 504 and a behavior support plan, but that's a little bit more rare. Usually a lot of the students with behavior support plans have IEPs. So usually the 504s don't have usually as many complexities as maybe the students that have an IEP. But yeah, that transition meeting and that communication at the beginning of the year and the professional learning during the in-service week are really important to make sure that the staff know how to respond to those students. Yeah.
And that's a good question, and I think a good segue
Yeah,
to
so that- yeah.
talk the multi-tier.
Yeah.
You've heard multi-tier systems of support.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
can continue to hear that, and then we wanted to make sure that the board has a full understanding of when you hear MTSS, multi-tier systems of support, what that actually
Yeah.
means, so.
So we're going to talk a little bit about, so I didn't know you had a workshop earlier this year with Dr. Bond, and she hit on MTSS for academics. So there are multiple areas of academics. We also have MTSS for social, emotional, and behavioral needs. One of the things that we're doing, I didn't put this in the slides, but we actually have a district leadership team that Dr. Bond and I work on with Kenny, Heather, and several other folks, where we're actually working on integrating both sides of the triangle, the academic side and then the non-academic side, so that it's easier for staff to understand the interventions and supports. But Heather's going to walk you through what we're doing on the social emotional side, and then we'll talk a little bit about school climate to wrap up.
Great, thank you. So on the next slide, you're gonna see a little bit of information about our social emotional screener. So, you know, when you think about screeners, you probably have heard about things like iReady, you've heard about Dibbles, Smarter Balance, like these are things we typically hear when it comes to academics. You think with like the nurse with like vision screening, like these are all typical ways that we assess what a student needs. When it comes to social emotional, there aren't as many ways. So we think about, okay, discipline referrals, that's one way, but then we're just catching students with that externalizing behavior, which we all kind of can see. We can walk around and we can see that. But there are students that have more intrinsic behaviors where maybe they're feeling really anxious. Maybe they're feeling like when there's a setback, they have a hard time recovering and getting back on track. Things that are happening in their head that we wouldn't necessarily see. Or maybe we see simple signs up, but we can't really tell what it is. So for the past 3 years, this is our 3rd year of full implementation, we've been doing the SABER screener. So SABER stands for Social, Academic, and Emotional Behavior Risk Screener. So there are 3 different subscales in this screener. We do it in 2 different ways in our district. So there is a teacher report for grades K through 3. So all students in grades K through 3 get the screener, but the teacher is responsible for filling out the screener on that student. Takes about 2 to 3 minutes per student. So we try to be really flexible with the school about giving them like a long enough window to fit that in and giving suggestions on how to give teachers that time because we understand it's an ask. Then with students who are in grades 4 and up, we have a self-report. So they're actually logging in and taking this assessment on their own. It's all electronic. So you just get on and you answer questions. I have given you guys 2 copies of those so that you see them. So the one that says Sabers, that is the tool that teachers are using for the younger kids. The one that says My Sabers, that's the one that students are getting on and doing themselves. The great thing is this is available in different languages. You can listen or you can read. And the symbols, it shows never, sometimes, often, or almost always. But with the students, instead of just numbers and words, it actually gives an image to kind of show never has an empty circle where almost always has a full circle. So it kind of gives kids a different way to rationalize. So when they're reading questions like I argue with others, they're thinking about like, oh, well, I never do that. Okay, so my circle's empty. I can click on that one. So give kids a different way to kind of look at that information. So what we can do with this information, we see results that come back low risk, some risk, or high risk. So there's a total overall score, but then there's also for each subscale. So I might have a student who is just coming up high risk in social behavior. So that might be a perfect student to put into a small group where we talk about social skills. So it's data that we can use to determine how can we intervene and be proactive to support that student in any of the skills that maybe they're lacking.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So I'm thinking, obviously, when we have computer-based assessments, I'm the student, I'm the happy clicker, I'm gonna be
Huh?
smart, and I'm just gonna
Yeah.
actually sit here and y'all are forcing me to take it.
Yep.
I
Yep.
literally got an email from an 8th grader that said, it was interesting, and he used a lot of slang and vernacular to basically to tell me the course and what we were having them do through puberty education 8th grade wasn't necessary because he wasn't interested, nor was his classmates interested in it. So if we're providing students with the saber and I'm just a happy clicker and I'm going through and I'm just,
Absolutely.
how do we account for that?
So there's a few different ways. So one way is we are monitoring when this is happening. So just last year, at the beginning of this year, there were 2 5th graders at Cook, and the person called me and said, look, I have 2 kids in 5th grade who thought it would be funny to give lots of wrong answers, right? Lots of answers that would pull up red flags. So we reset their scores, but that's because people were looking and kind of keeping an eye on that. The other thing is keeping in mind that it's not just one tool. So you can have a student that has a bad day. Maybe my parents are going through a separation, so today was a particularly hard day and my answers look a lot worse than they would on a normal day for me. And you think about there's different points. So I'm gonna look at attendance, I'm gonna look at nurse visits, I'm gonna look at discipline data. Like I'm gonna look at more things than just this screener tool, especially if kids pop up that I'm like, oh, that I never would have thought that kid would have shown up. I'm gonna correlate it with some other data. Because the thing about this assessment too is that some questions are stated positively and some are stated negatively. So I might be thinking that hitting never all the time is like the right answer, and I might just go through and hit never. But on some of these, I am respectful. If I hit never, that actually doesn't sound great, right? So it's thinking about, it could be skewed data and we can reset that, but those are things that we want to keep an eye out for. And that when our MTSS teams are reviewing this data together, those are some of the things they're looking out for.
Just real quick, Heather, we didn't put preschool in this because they're doing a pilot this year. But preschool, because of the concerns they've been having about social emotional regulation, they are piloting a screening tool that's meant for early childhood that's called the EDECA. So we didn't include that, but that pilot is going on this year as well.
Yeah, and they really felt like something was missing because with the Savers tool, we were catching things that they weren't catching with their Teaching Strategies Gold screener that they were using. So they were looking for like that missing piece. So that's kind of why they're piloting this one. On the next 3 slides, it really just reiterates what you're seeing on this paper, but I wanted to include them especially for the people that are tuning in virtually. So this just shows what those questions again kind of look like and how they're scored. So then I wanted you guys to take an opportunity to look at some data. So if you go one more, I think, right? Yes. Wait, one more.
There it is.
There we go. So this is, I pulled just 9 random schools. I redacted the school names. I just wanted to give you an idea of what some of the data might look like. So we took this in October and we took it again. We just finished it last week. We wait until about October because especially for the K through 3 students, teachers should really get to know kids for about 4 to 6 weeks before they fill out this survey. And so we waited till about October. They had about 3 weeks to complete it. And then this last window, they had about another 3 weeks to complete it. During the interim, ideally, we're providing interventions when we saw that students have some needs. And on the next few slides, I'll show you interventions. But on this slide, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. I know, I'm sorry. But on this slide in particular, I wanted you to get a chance to look at the data to think about what kind of conversations that we might be having. So when you're looking at this data, what are some questions you have? And what are some things you think that maybe we would look at?
So these are all K through 3.
Nope, actually, these are a mixture of middle school and high schools on this page right now. So you're looking at kids who took the My Savers on their own.
There it is.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So what we're looking at here, that first color, that light color is all low risk students. So if you see, for example, let's look at the bottom school, school number 9. We have low risk, then that light pink color that's in the middle, that's some risk. And then that darker color is the high risk. So if you look at school 9, I'm already seeing that there's way less high risk kids than there were in the fall. Like, what are some things you're thinking about when you're looking at this data? Like, what do you think, like what my team is looking at this, like, what are some things that we should be picking up on or questions we might want to ask? Or any concerns you might have?
What sort of interventions you had?
Sure, school number 9 did something
Yeah.
pretty good, ideally, right? Or all the kids who were high risk had some random happy moment happen. Maturity, that's a great point, because one thing we see in grades 6 and 9, we always see slightly elevated scores because those transition years are really hard. Yeah.
Laura, you want to say something?
No, I was gonna say number 4. Actually, I know we were looking at number 9, but school
Mhm.
number 4 jumps out at me.
Yep.
in terms of
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
The opposite.
Yeah.
And then are there some things that could be environmental, right?
Right.
That really have an impact on school culture, school climate,
Mhm.
that could be external factors that create conditions for students to, you know,
This school has a higher MLL and newcomer population, and right now, clearly, we're in a state where some of our families might be a little extra elevated in their anxiety, right? So that could be a factor where maybe that's what's going on. It could be a factor of, well, in that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade area, right? There's a lot happening with kids. So, right, so we could just be hitting a natural kind of jump. Yeah. So these are the kinds of questions that our team asks each other, and then we support our school teams with doing.
Okay.
So our tier 1 team, when they look at this data, they're looking school-wide. So they're going to look at each grade level, they're going to look at each classroom. And so if in particular, my 4th grade seems really off during this screening window, I might be thinking, okay, is 4th grade struggling for a particular reason? Are there maybe more novice teachers in that grade level? Should we go do some training on classroom management? Like, what's missing here? Maybe if it's that it's like a trend where we're seeing a certain grade level is higher in the fall, but lower in the winter and spring. Well, like, what's kind of causing that? Is that anxiety of that transition year? So these are the conversations we have, questions we ask, but we really try to prompt our school teams to look at this data in that trend way, but also our tier 2, 3 team, we try to dig in deeper. So when students are being identified as having some risk or high risk, What are we going to do for those students? So that team really looks at interventions, which are on the next few slides. So we have social emotional interventions at the tier 1, 2, and 3 level. So tier 1 is, again, you've been hearing this all year, what we do for all kids, right? So all kids have access to grade level, age appropriate SEL curriculum. All of our schools, EYP, all the way up to 12th grade, have an SEL curriculum that they use. Students have at least one 30-minute lesson per week around SEL. In some cases, it's much more. So then these are some things like our school-wide behavior matrix. So each school has expectations. We teach those expectations to students. We talk about those regularly. We use the same language. A lot of our schools have acknowledgement systems where maybe they're getting bucks or tickets or whatever it is for displaying those appropriate behaviors. So these are examples of tier 1 pieces. When we go to the next slide, we see more tier 2. When I think of tier 2, I think more of small group and more of things that are similar for a small group of students. So in tier 2 here, we see different types of curriculum that we use at that small group level, or things like check-in, check-out, and 2x10, which is really around building relationships with students and supporting them. So you are working one-on-one with a student, but you could be working one-on-one with a group of 10 students. So that's kind of why it's more of a tier 2 level. If we go to the tier 3 level, then we're seeing, okay, we're getting to the point where this student really needs more help when it comes to social emotional needs. We might be thinking about, is it time to look at a behavior support plan? Is it time to look at, an individualized healthcare plan? Do we need to increase individual counseling? Maybe instead of a small group, maybe the student needs one-to-one counseling, and we can up the intensity of what that looks like. So that's really how we respond to the needs that pop up on the screener. But as Dr. Green said earlier, not just that data point, we really need to correlate that with other things, because we know that data can be skewed to just one, and students are self-reporting in most cases. So we know anything can happen when you're clicking buttons. So that's the gist of how we screen for social emotional needs and then how we intervene.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
How are parents informed about the results of the screener?
So that's a great question. That's come up a few times. So we do send out a letter in the beginning of the year to let people know that we will be screening students twice a year and what it looks at. We do not send home the results. Of course, if a parent were to call and ask questions about the risk level their student is at, we would absolutely share that with them. It's a part of their educational record. But I do have to be super honest that if we send home the results for all students, we might start getting skewed data, because I know that if I put how I'm really feeling and then my mom's going to get a call about it later on tonight, I'm probably not going to be honest next time.
Right.
So while of course a parent is absolutely able to ask, we have been kind of talking to our staff about how to respond in a way that explains that in a very positive, nice way. We're not trying to hide anything, but you will know if your if your child's put into any type of social emotional group or an intervention that responds to it. So that can kind of give you an idea that maybe we caught something on the screener.
Yeah, because I would think that if there was an elevated risk, you want to share that with families.
Absolutely. And the thing with these questions, this screener in particular doesn't screen for anything that is immediate, like of immediate concern. So this is very like strengths-based and just talking about specific skills. So you're not going to see anything on here that would give you immediate reason to be worried about the safety of your child. So if that were the case, absolutely, we would be alerting people right away. But this is a little more general than that. So we have time to be proactive and kind of respond with an intervention as opposed to having to act right away.
Are you sharing the?
Can you say that again?
Stop.
Maybe we
Sorry,
lost-
my dog turned on the TV. No, I was saying, do you share the academic results, those screeners with families? And I'm not saying that they should be shared with every child's family who takes this assessment. Like you said, it is a lot of self-reporting 4 to 12, but I guess I was more concerned about, even if it's not something as severe as needing some type of, some ideation, but if there's some sadness or there's some things that a student is feeling, for the parents to be made aware of it, because a lot of times there's things that at school they don't know about that could help the parents at home. So that was just a thought that I had about sharing that level of data for those who are at elevated risk.
Yeah, and I will say we've definitely had a lot of discussion around this because you're right. You know, when you, at the end of the year, you get your reports on how your child did on iReady or Smarter Balance, and you don't see how they answered each question, but you see the general, like, what do I need to be worried about or what are areas of weaknesses? And this is one of those things where, yes, we could share out the general total risk level. But then, it's challenging, but I'll say we've had the same conversations because I agree, like, as a parent, I want to know. And it's really hard because both of my kids attend this school district and I intentionally don't go in and look at their data, even though I would really like to. But that feels wrong, right?
And that would be part of also through MTSS and educators working with families, that if someone saw someone at a high or moderate risk, to be able to have that conversation to
Right.
see if something's going on.
Right.
Well, and
And engage with families. So that's definitely a valid point, Dr.
Uh-huh,
Neesmith, and we'll
uh-huh.
make sure we, again, work with our special service department and our
Mhm.
problem solving teams.
Mhm.
One, to make sure staff feel comfortable and are being mindful that if they can genuinely have some type of concern, or if a student between fall and mid-year, it becomes elevated, like we should be doing our due diligence through other avenues, because that's why I asked the question about the happy clicker.
Mhm.
Because if we're triangulating data, we would also have another data
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Whether that would be through, grades dropping,
Mhm.
higher rates of discipline, higher rates of nursing visits, to be able to validate, triangulate that data to make sure we're having conversations with families and parents to make sure that they're aware. Because
Absolutely,
they could be noticing something at home. that the
Yeah.
right.
So-
And I wouldn't suggest that classroom teachers make the calls, but maybe the school counselor or someone in the school that could make that call and just inform the parent.
Right. Well, and I was gonna say, just to clarify two things. So when it comes to the screener, we don't share, but I do want to make it clear that for the risk assessments that we talked about earlier, that is always shared with the families. And then also, as Heather said, if a student is in a social emotional intervention, then the parents are getting updates about how they're doing. Like let's say they have joined a small group related to anxiety, right? That is something that is shared, and then the counselor or psychologist, whoever is running that group, is providing updates to the family.
Right.
I think, Mr. Leonard, you had a question.
Yes, first question is, how long have we been doing this system,
This is our,
TSS,
MTSS in general or just this screen?
MTSS?
So when I came into the district 10 years ago, there were some schools that had an MTSS system at the time. On the social emotional side, a lot of times they were referring to that as PBIS, but it wasn't at every school. So 8 years ago, we started the process of looking at MTSS for social emotional for every school. And we actually did kind of a mapping with each school about where they had strengths and where they had needs. So 8 years ago, we started something called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, where we looked in the spring at each school in the district to look at where they had current practices. So for example, some schools had behavioral expectations at tier 1, but they didn't have tier 2 or 3 interventions. So then our department really worked with that school on building whatever their needs were. So each school at that point, 8 years ago, created an action plan on looking at where they needed to grow. Some schools were actually on the opposite. Some schools had a lot of tier 3, but they didn't have anything at tier 1. So what was happening is they didn't have any school-wide practices. So all the kids were being referred to the counselor or psychologist. Whereas other schools had a lot of tier 1 school-wide practices, but they needed to really strengthen tier 2 and tier 3. So I would say 8 years ago, we really started that journey in working with every school on building out where they needed, wherever that we started. Really, it was meeting them where they were. We looked at the map of what they had and what they didn't have, and then we've been working with them. So I would say, since our last strategic plan, we had an emphasis on MTSS for social emotional. But one of the things that happened is we started to become siloed. So academics was kind of over here, social emotional was over here. So in our current strategic plan, our goal is to bring those two systems together so they're not separated and siloed.
And so
Yeah.
what you'll see now is an intentionality to make sure that we are standardizing this process across all Red Clay schools.
Exactly.
Because I
Yep.
think, so, and I'll again use my mentee as an example.
Mhm.
He gets supports after our mentor session. And so I asked him, I'm like, are you going to RTI? And he's like, what's RTI? So now I'm dating myself, right? Because I'm thinking response to intervention. He's like, RTI? He's like, no, I'm going to MTSS. And he's going for academic support, but the reality of it is, like, it actually was kind of this proud leadership moment.
Mhm.
Because now students are also owning the language and it's not a
Yeah.
stigma in terms of
Yeah.
them knowing where they're going to get, whether that's behavior or academic support. So to your point, because I know you've been in the district, you heard it, it's been fragmented.
Mhm.
And so that's why we've been conscious under our current strategic plan to make sure that there is a standard across all schools. And again, depending on need, depending on data, some may have to go deeper with
Yeah.
tier two supports versus others, but tier one, making sure that we have that foundational work across all schools in Red Clay
Mhm.
is kind of where we are.
I would also say, you know, we've been doing MCSS a very long time,
Yeah.
elements of it, but we haven't been calling it that, right? So back, I think it was 2021, when the state passed regulations that called it MCSS.
Right.
So while the language is new, a lot of the work has been here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So you know my next question, right?
Mhm.
The data shows, are we getting better at fewer in tier three? Or is it school?
Well-
District-wide, are we getting better?
Yeah, so I mean, I
Should
would.
have that data, right?
Right, so yeah, we have the data, we have the triangle data for every school and for the district overall. I would say when we look at the triangle data, so we monitor that at the district office. We also, as Heather said, our team actually works with the school level teams on reviewing their data and looking at what supports are needed. I think over the last few years, I would say since COVID, we've seen certain shifts in what's needed, right? So we've seen really a lot of schools identifying way more students that are in need of support related to anxiety. It's definitely a big trend in the district. We've seen a lot of students in need of support around social skills and how to social problem solving, like what do I do in the event that I have a disagreement and how do I interact with other people? So I would say anxiety and then social skills and social problem solving have been a trend. So when you say like, are we getting better? I think there's some areas where we've had really a lot of growth in getting better. And then there's some areas that we're seeing increased risk in certain areas. But I wouldn't say it's different than if you look at kind of national data or even the trends that you may hear in the media around what students are struggling with. I think we are seeing those trends, especially around anxiety and then social skills and appropriate interactions with other peers.
And
Where do I find that data? Does Sean have that data? Where I can see?
Sean's in technology.
Yeah, so our department has all of the triangle data. It's through the data service center. So we see all of that. And then this year, Data Service Center has been working with us on importing the SABRE screening data as well.
And
So
what we
we
can do,
have that in
we'll put a
iTracker.
data profile together
Yep.
so that all boards.
Yeah, I've been
can
asking
actually-
for that for a while.
And one of the things that, again, that I think to Dr. Sellis's point, we're seeing a lot, we're also seeing a lot more staff needs,
Yes.
post-COVID
Absolutely.
in terms of, what staff members are needing,
That's what I was getting at.
what communities are needing,
Mhm.
again, dysregulation between staff triggering students, students triggering staff.
Yep.
And again, I think that's what we're hearing and seeing a lot, and actually parents, right? You're seeing like families. So again, the hope or goal is the more that we can really standardize and look at tier one supports and interventions, the less we'll have to
Yeah.
intervene at that tier two and then
Right.
tier three.
Yep.
But it's a constant battle as we're
understand.
definitely looking at it, so. But yeah, we'll make sure.
Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Oates is going to walk us through, I know one of the requests for today was how do we look at school climate? So Heather mentioned a lot of data sources that we look at. We look at attendance, discipline, several different things, but we also annually do the school climate survey, which Mr. Oates is going to kind of talk to us about how we use that data.
Right, and so we just talked a lot about some of the things that we do for students to kind of measure their social emotional well-being. And also ensure their safety and make sure we've got practices and procedures in place for psychological well-being of youngsters. I think one of the primary ways we pressure check our effectiveness with that as it pertains to school climate is by participating in the Delaware School Climate Survey. So basically we work with the Delaware MTSS Center to give the school climate survey to all of our students, our staff, and also our families. And really, we use this to kind of give us a brief but an important measure of where we stand with school climate on a yearly basis. The survey window is actually open now. It started on February 17th and it ends on April 11th. And our schools have flexibility to decide when they're actually going to give that survey to students. They make sure they send out to families, and they make sure the staff takes it as well. And it basically gives us an opportunity to assess basically how our students and our staff and our families perceive the climate and the school environment overall. It helps us measure the relationships that we have with between our school partners. So thinking about how student-to-student relationships work, parent-to-student or parent-to-teacher relationships work, and also just understanding overall the perceptions around the effectiveness of the strategies and the systems that we put into place to support school climate across the board. And it also does have a subscale that we can use to kind of look at how we are responding to challenging situations in the school, whether it's on the SEL side, how we're using positive, but also punitive reinforcement to try and correct student behavior and to test and target our social emotional competencies. So as you all are aware, the school climate is linked to a wide variety of different aspects in our school, thinking about the academic, the behavioral, and the social emotional well-being achievement of kids. And really, if our school climate is strong and people are buying into the system, the structure we're putting in place, we'll see growth on the academic side. We'll be able to understand sort of the folks' personal attitudes and perceptions around our practices and our procedures. It gives us solid information about attendance and school avoidance. It helps us identify some of the targeted behavior problems that our schools are challenged with. And it gives us an opportunity to then develop systems to respond to those behavior challenges proactively to try and decrease them over time. And then ultimately, it just gives us a good idea of the overall emotional well-being of the school community. The survey results, again, they're used for us to evaluate our programming strategies. We basically use those survey results to determine what we should be doing moving forward based off the feedback that we're getting from our students, teachers, and our family members. And again, it really does focus on the important things that were kind of touched on a little bit earlier, such as teacher-student relationships, because a lot of times the stronger that relationship, the stronger the outcome for the kids, and also the happier the teacher. We also think about how our students are relating with one another and how they're interacting with one another, making sure that we have strong structures in place to kind of promote that type of interaction between our students. It also helps us look at what our expectations are, making sure that they are clearly defined and clearly communicated to kids. And it gives our students in particular a way to kind of express their perceptions around that to let us know, are there areas in which we are not necessarily being clear? So we can clean that up as we progress through the school year and move into a new school year. It's an opportunity too for our students and families and our teachers to kind of talk about, to give their perspective on the fairness of rules. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in fair when we're talking about how we respond to different challenging behaviors from one student to the next. So we can get good information about that, perceptions around fairness. And then teacher-parent relationships is very important. So it lets us know, how strong are we when it comes to meeting our parents where they are and making them feel supported, and being accessible to them in a positive way that is ultimately designed to improve outcomes for their children. And again, just looking at our overall use of our disciplinary practices, whether they are positive or punitive. And it also lets us test to see the effectiveness of the social emotional learning techniques that we are putting.
Can I say something about fairness of the rules?
Certainly.
I think you also have to include consistency of rules from school to school, teacher to teacher, and so forth, because that brings up a whole new issue. And I know I saw it in the schools. One teacher says, this is okay, another teacher says, no, it's not. And then the kids go, well, I could do it in last class. And then you have conflict.
And that sometimes comes out on the student raters and also sometimes even on the parent responses to the climate survey. If there's a feeling that, yes, there's the code of conduct or the student handbook, there's kind of rules, but we feel that it's inconsistent. That often comes up, comes out of the climate survey.
And-
Yeah.
Does the climate survey still do teacher to teacher, like staff to staff relationship?
They do have staff to staff.
Because I think that's part of it too, where,
Yes.
sometimes it's uncomfortable confronting a colleague or peer
Yes.
who may not be honoring, but that's another thing within that
Cell
school.
phone is a prime example.
Right, yep.
Yeah.
And so I'll actually touch on that briefly when we start talking about towards the end of the presentation, when we start thinking about like the behavior matrices and stuff. Because that's sort of where we address some of those issues and kind of level set across the board. So once schools complete their climate survey and school teams get that data back, And this isn't necessarily what schools do it because they've got access to this all the time. But a good way to kind of use that data is to engage in some professional learning around the areas that were sort of identified as high needs through your survey result at the school. So the MTSS Technical Assistance Center has placed some professional development on PDMS that all educators can engage in for professional learning purposes. And they are really centered around the core areas that they test throughout the climate survey, the teacher-student relationships, student-to-student relationships, bullying, school-wide student engagement, and ultimately school safety as well. So basically, the educators can kind of go in and they can kind of view these modules. They are all about an hour long. They are either in PowerPoint format or video format, and they can get continuing licensure credits for that, just to kind of shore up some of their knowledge about some of these areas, and then use that to kind of help plan for future systems and practices that we will put in place at the school level.
And so just point out something around that. A lot of schools, once they get their climate survey results back, typically their MTSS Tier 1 team will review the results. One of the practices we've had for several years is having that team present at a faculty meeting so that people are seeing kind of what did our students, our families, and us as the teacher, faculty, what was our reflection on this? And then we have a lot of building administrators that will then connect with those modules. Like, let's say there was a particular issue around teacher-student relationships, they will use the resources from those modules in faculty meetings. So I think our MTSS teams do a good job of turning that around and providing support. The other way that we use it, I know there's 4 of us that supervise building administration, Mr. Pruitt, Dr. DeCastro, Dr. Huffman, and myself. I know all of us, the 4 of us, we look at the climate survey results that come in, and we actually use that with our summer meetings with administrators to look at, like, what is the pulse on your building? Let's look at the areas that we can improve the climate in so that they can plan for faculty meetings at the beginning of the year. So we really do utilize that data tangibly. It's not like we just kind of report on it overall, but we look school by school at what the needs are.
Well, and I think part of that too is perception, right? You know, perception one comes reality, but then sometimes without using the hard data and using that, sometimes people perceive that things are a lot better than what they are,
Right.
right? And so how do we actually
Yes.
work with building level leadership to engage them in an authentic way to say, while you may think this is going on in your building, this is what the data is saying, and
Yes.
where is there,
Absolutely,
you know, a disconnect in terms of what you think you're seeing versus what your data is saying, and
Yes.
also for us as a district,
Mhm.
right? You know, are we really looking at equitable resources? Are we actually providing resources and services to where, you know, the needs are? So,
Mhm.
And one of the things that's very useful about the school climate survey is that, particularly on the adult side, there are opportunities to provide narrative feedback.
Mhm.
So they're not just checking the box to say that, you know, I feel this way about something else. They also have an opportunity to give narrative feedback that school leaders and leadership teams can then use to really think through how we're going to approach similar challenges moving forward in the future. So this kind of touches on what you were just asking about as far as varying expectations from teacher to teacher and also one place to another. We constantly have discussions about how we can more strategically and effectively align our practices from building to building, because we also have some students who are very transient in nature.
Mhm.
And it's very challenging for a young person to kind of adapt to a set of rules and then be uprooted, placed into a different school, even though it's part of the same district, and they have a totally different set of expectations. And they, for all intents and purposes, are expected to adapt to those new expectations immediately, like as soon as they walk through the door. So we constantly think about how we can align our systems and our structures across the districts, while also leaving flexibility for the individual identity of the buildings to have additional things to support their school communities. So with that said, we do require all of our schools to have a school-wide behavior matrix. And so basically what the matrix does is it's a table for all intents and purposes that we use to define expectations in a clear and concise way across all of the school environments that we decide are most appropriate for us to set those expectations for young people. We really do try to ground those expectations on the core principles of the building. And a lot of times it's based off things like respect and being a good citizen, all of those lovely words that we use to describe good citizenship. And it's a proactive approach to kind of teach and communicate what our expected behaviors are across all of these locations. So
Aren't those expectations or parent-student handbook? Isn't that what we go by?
So this is a little bit more nuanced than our parent-student handbook. That's
Okay.
more of how we kind of address situations and have expectations in the district. This is how our school develop expectations for their individual communities. So thinking about how should students be behaving in the cafeteria, the hallway, on the
Bathroom.
school bus, in the bathrooms, in an auditorium, or in any of the targeted locations in a school in which we need to have a common expectation and we need to use common language in order to express that expectation.
And that's building community, right? Go ahead.
No, I want to add, how are you guys measuring the effectiveness of this? Like, are school fights down? Like, are we looking at?
Yeah, so we look at, so that's a great question, I'd say. So we look at both office discipline referrals as well as FYI. So in the DSC RAP system, there with what teachers do is they have the minor referrals, like things that are classroom managed go in as a FYI. And then things that need administrative action would go in as a referral or office discipline referral. So what we're looking for by putting in this type of approach, we're looking to see decreases in referrals and FYIs. We're also looking obviously to see decreases of punitive things like in school or out of school suspension or other kinds of consequences. Yes.
Okay.
So,
To
and I.
a degree,
yes.
and again, and I think in full transparency, like,
Yeah.
this is ever evolving. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we're sharing this, but also the other reason why we have things like disproportionality,
Mhm.
right? And we
Yeah.
look at over identification, in terms of special ed. And so those are all the monikers that, yes, we can see decreases in some areas, but we also want to see increases in on-track attendance,
Yes.
right? We also want to see increases in students' ability to participate in co-curricular, extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
Really, what is the more positive? And the best way to summarize this is the behavior matrix is a tool to build community within the school.
Yeah.
And I would always use the example of how many different bedtimes
Mhm.
that students will have, right? Because they come with their own set of family norms, right?
Yes.
And you come into a school environment where this is how I'm used to dealing with adults. I don't have a bedtime, but so-and-so may have a bedtime. I
Yeah.
don't have free access to technology. And so this is really to teach the expected behavior,
Yeah.
to teach it in a non-threatening way, to build community within schools.
Yeah.
And then to your question, the code is really, the handbook is really how do we respond
Yes.
to infractions where those are met.
Yes.
But part of our challenge is we have to do a better job as systems
Mhm.
being consistent in how we teach and model the expectation.
And like a tangible example, last year, we had one of our elementary schools that had seen a really big increase of bus referrals, right? And when they looked at their behavior matrix, they had not addressed the bus. They only addressed places in the school. So they had cafeteria, they had hallway, they had classrooms, but they had not addressed the bus. So they revamped their matrix and included a whole thing on the bus. And then they actually had these activities teaching the kids about bus, the expectations on the bus. And then they're now seeing, they launched that this fall and they're saying, wow, we're really seeing big decreases in bus referrals. So that would be like an example of how you could use a tool like this to create common expectations to hopefully see a decrease.
Well, and if you don't address it at the bus, guess what's gonna happen at breakfast?
They're gonna come in.
Guess what's gonna happen at
Exactly,
breakfast?
exactly.
And you will hope
Yeah.
that they're looking at their referrals in the morning
Yeah.
or off of breaks, right? You know, again, whenever you have an extended period of time where you're not in school, post holidays, like even now, daylight savings. This is a key time where people are dysregulated.
Yeah. We all lost
There's more accidents this week.
Right.
Yes.
There are more car accidents this week as a result of
Mhm.
time shift.
Yeah.
So how are we really in tune to make sure like the behavior major, like we're in tune to school culture, school
Yeah.
climate?
And another example, and you'll see this, I'm sure, the next time we're probably at a board meeting at CAB. So CAB for a long time had a matrix called the CAB Callow Way, and they focused on
I remember
WAY, the
that.
CAB Callow Way, it was in their halls,
Yep.
right? But one of the things they said last year is, you know what? This feels outdated. It feels like it needs to be freshened up. We feel like there's a lot of things that our kids are coming in with that we didn't address in the CAB Callow Way. So they changed it. This year, they had a committee that involved student voice, where they changed it to the arts. And so now they're using ARTS. And the students actually developed the expectations for the different areas of the matrix. And they're actually in the process of rolling that out this third marking period. So that would be an example where they had it, but they were seeing that they didn't feel it was as responsive to the patterns that they were seeing with the students. And so they revamped it based on the needs.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
Andre,
like
you weren't here when I asked for that data. They're gonna get us that data.
Oh, good.
Oh, the
We'll
triangle.
share triangle data with the board and even just some of the things that
Thank you.
as an anecdote, like we're seeing minor infractions turn to major
Yes.
situations that if they don't get dealt with. So even across like elementary, some of the most frequent behaviors are inappropriate behavior, which
Yes.
tends from a coding is a buy-all, catch-all, but it's broad. Or you're seeing behavior, just, offensive touching, right? That goes back to Dr. Sellis's point in terms of that peer-to-peer interaction, students not knowing proximity. Or disruption to the educational process, which in essence really are major disruptions that are disrupting learning.
Yeah.
Middle school, similar, inappropriate behavior becomes that buy-all, catch-all in terms of, so how are we disaggregating that? Working with those building level schools to see like what time of day is this happening? Is it during unstructured time? Is it during, class changes, hall changes? Is it after school? And then high school, actually like class skip. Like continues to be something, then going to your point, now I'm a staff member.
Yeah.
And I see this student in the hallway,
Yeah.
now I'm engaging. So really starting to just drill down to look at time, space, and frequency will really help us get to the point, but we have to build that consistency to really look at collective care and how we're responding across the board. To put all of this information that we gave you and a lot of information from not just the physical safety of our buildings, but the psychological safety to make sure that we're addressing it. Because again, we can look at it statewide, we can look at it district-wide, we can look at it national. We're at a point right now where there are a lot of needs within our schools. A lot of that also has to do with social drivers.
Yes.
Us being in tune to what's happening in and about our communities, to be able to be proactive, to be responsive. That requires community partnerships. That requires us to really engage with families, representative parent groups. So this is all, again, I think for this year, as we approach these series of workshops, are things that are embedded in our strategic plan to be able to anchor a lot of these systems so that if we can deal with tier one, a lot of that tiered supports will be lessened over time, but it's definitely continue to work because year after year, we have to evolve with the trends, social media being one, different kind of other opportunities that students and families are engaged in. So, again, this was part of the board's request, so hopefully you got a lot of good information out of this evening.
Very
We'll
good.
make sure we share the triangle data.
Thank you.
But as you go back and you look at the report, you pull off the links, if there are specific questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out to AJ, Dr. Celestin, Mr. Oates or Ms. Godwin, just to be able to follow up. But before we wrap up, we want to make sure we are intentional in answering any kind of additional questions that you may have. Otherwise, we'll get the data out to you and have some follow-up discussion.
Fantastic.
I'm
Very good.
hearing about AI and how we're going to kind of control that with classes. Kids are using AI to do papers and things now. And how are we going to identify that?
So actually, I have a meeting with a group coming up. I think everyone is grappling with AI, right? Just in terms of, one, how you embrace it. Because I think the window of opportunity to say that we're resistant to it, that ship has sailed. So we got to figure out how to integrate it, how to work with it. Because corporations are using it,
Yep.
companies are using it.
These are wise to it.
And so forth, and even working with our staff to be able to integrate that in, right? And how they're doing it. So
Yeah, but it's really about teaching the students how to use
When
it
it's
appropriately,
appropriate,
right?
right? And there are ways to kind of search to look for if students are using it. Like I know my one child is a cab and she said, when I did this paper, like my teacher has a way to check to see if ChatGPT wrote it for me.
Yep.
Not to use it because that was a fear. Yeah.
Make me arrested.
The challenge is the technology is generating so fast that a lot of the bots that they use to
Counter, yeah.
counter it. They
It's
obsolete within.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So we are definitely living in the matrix.
Thank you all for your time and really wonderful questions. And as Dr. Green said, I know all of us are happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and we'll pull that triangle. I'll send in them a weekly update.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you to those online. I know sometimes it's hard online. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Neesmith.
Oh, my God.
Great presentation. Have a good night, everyone.
I don't understand you at all.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah.